My name is Ben Dewey. I'm our VP of Apps and Experiences here at Tallan. Today I want to talk to you about a solution assessment that we offer called our App Innovate Solution Assessment. At Tallan, we are a full-service consulting company who primarily focuses on a Microsoft partnership, and one of our kind of main courses of work is through these solution assessments that Microsoft provides. So, going to start off today doing a little bit of an introduction and talking a little bit about the program. I want to talk a little bit about App Innovate and a little bit, what it is and why you should use it, what you want to, what you're going to get out of it. Talk about the basics of the deliverables. Then we'll go into, where Tallan has done it and how we've done it before. And then we got a small audience, so I'm happy to kind of open up to Q&A and we can kind of go off script and talk about any questions you guys may have about modernization of your applications in any way. Already gave instructions. My name is Ben Dewey. I'm our VP of Apps and Experiences at Tallan. My main responsibility is in delivering these app innovates as well as doing any of our custom application development. So if we have any custom application development from a design perspective, as well as from an implementation perspective, that ultimately falls under my responsibility. So this slide really just goes over a high-level view of the solution assessment. So we work very closely with Microsoft on a number of different solution assessments. There are currently 8 solution assessments with Microsoft, and they're all really designed in order to give customers a roadmap on how to get on how to move to the next step on their cloud journey. So if if you're looking to move to lift and shift, then you might have an Azure Foundation assessment that will help you set up your landing zone and figure out everything you need to do to get that infrastructure set up. The one we're talking about today is called an application innovation, and it's more about taking your application up to 1 to 5 applications, doing a code analysis of them to figure out whether there needs to be any code changes or modifications in order to run it on a full platform as a service. So in order to get started talking a little bit about that, I like to just, set the ground level for a bit of cloud topics. I think this is an old slide, but it has a good purpose here. On the far left-hand side, you'll see our kind of on-premises architecture. And the idea with this is this something that vendors have been doing for a while. If they are running servers, in their offices, there's a lot of extra overhead that you have to manage and scale, specifically when we're talking about networking, the servers that are there, the storage of those servers, and any sort of virtualization technology that you have going on. So all that management of all those servers is part of the IT organization within the company to manage. As you move over to the middle stack, that's kind of infrastructure as a service, or IaaS. And the real benefit there is that you no longer really have to manage the infrastructure of the applications. You just say, I want a server, and it spins it up and provisions everything you need. And you have full control over that. You have admin rights, and you can do whatever you want on those servers. The next section over is the platform as a service, and that's really a sweet spot from a vendor management perspective because you still own all the application code and the data. But everything else from the infrastructure as well as the actual operating system, any updates to the operating system, and updates to any third-party frameworks that are running on that machine is all handled automatically by the cloud provider. The last one is software as a service, and that's where everything's outsourced. And think of something like Microsoft Office 365. Your email is managed as a software as a service. You don't actually have to ever go and manage any of the servers or any of the application code for that. You just configure it and it runs for you. So Tallan, through our solution assessments, have a number of different opportunities. If you're looking to just do kind of the lift and shift and moving your infrastructure and your applications to the cloud. But this application innovation solution assessment is really around modernizing your applications and moving over to this platform as a service. So you're actually taking advantage of all the native functionality within Microsoft Azure around app services to get your application up and running and connected over so that you're no longer dependent on any of the on-premises and infrastructure. So Microsoft takes Tallan takes a very similar approach to all of our projects. We all start with the idea of understanding the customer's vision. So, where are you at? Where are you trying to go? What goals do you have? From there, we look at providing you with a roadmap. So based on the information, we'll help kind of set the stage for where you want to go, provide architecture on that route, and provide any kind of guidance and training to help kind of make sure you understand the roadmap and where you're trying to go. If you're ready to move on and you kind of have that roadmap and ready to execute, that's totally fine. But there's also oftentimes where customers want to do a bit of a proof of concept to make sure that they understand the cloud architecture that they're moving to, make sure everything is performant and secure the way they're expecting it. And then once that's all set, then we move into setting up the foundation, getting everything built and secured, moving that into our actual innovation and migration phases. And then the last part where we all end all of our projects is really around setting it up so that you can maintain it. It has all the governance capabilities in there to make sure it's secured, and all the knobs are turned down so that security is tightened up as well as can be. In order to kind of kick off this process from an App Innovate perspective, we have this App Innovate offering that is funded by Microsoft. So the majority of it is typically funded from Microsoft. There are some clients that we'll work with that have some additional components that they like to add to it. So we'll kind of co-fund in that regard, where there's the customer is contributing some as well as Microsoft. And this is really the one I'm going to focus on today. After that, if we do go into a proof of concept and you're not ready to do the full modernization, that's where the App in 30 might come into play. That allows us to do a bit of a proof of concept around your application. The idea is to build something tangible and get something deployed in 30 days. That's the kind of idea of the App in 30. There are some funding mechanisms that are available for that proof of concept. If you are interested in any of those, then feel free to reach out to your BDM at Tallan. We can certainly get you set up and kind of understand what funding options might be available on that side. So looking into the App Innovate as an offering, it's broken out into 3 phases. Each of these phases is about 1 to 2 weeks. Our first phase is around planning. So in this meeting, or in this kind of phase, we really focus on discovery meetings with the client, with you guys, making sure we understand what your goals are, what you're trying to do, and where you currently are. In order to do the as-is architecture of our 1 to 5 candidate applications, we basically run a scan. We use a tool called Cloud Pilot, which I have some screenshots of later. And that Cloud Pilot tool will essentially show you a readiness score for your applications, and then based on that readiness score, we can determine how many code changes would be required in order for it to move up to the cloud. But it also gives us an understanding of what those applications are currently doing, what their as-is architecture is, so that we ultimately can improve on it and provide the future state architecture. So that moves into the second phase, which is around really doing that architectural design and planning. In order to do this, we have working sessions with you where we actually walk through your needs, walk through Azure's capabilities, and explain to you kind of what most common people would use for Azure best practices for an Azure environment. And then based on your needs, we'll customize it. We also design a to-be architecture. So based on those candidate applications that we submitted earlier, we'll come up with an improved Azure architecture, focusing on that platform as a service idea that we mentioned before. We're using either Azure App Services, possibly even using serverless technology like Azure Functions. If your application has some sort of a long-running process where you click a button and then it goes and does some processing, you might want to move that over to a queue process. So using something like Azure Service Bus or Azure Event Hub to take events in based on a long-running process trigger, and then have a serverless function execute that code in a more optimized way and scalable way. Once we've kind of reviewed and designed that to-be architecture, we finalize our roadmap with this kind of future pilot as the modernization target. And then we also start working on the Azure landing zone and the governance that's going to be needed for that future state architecture. Our last phase is around actually putting the plan together and reviewing it. So we do share those deliverables. There's 2 costs that are involved in that. I'll show it on the next slide, but not only the cost for the remediation effort and any changes that are required for the application, but also the monthly Azure costs that it would cost for the new hosting environment. We give an executive presentation, and you're welcome to invite anyone at your company to that executive presentation so that they're able to see the progress of the work. And then the last thing is having that output for each of the applications that we've scanned, and we typically score them based on a number of different categories. But ultimately, based on the application, is this something that should be retired, something that should be replaced with something maybe as a software as a service option? Is it something that can just be migrated and then just be a lift and shift and don't touch it? Should we modernize it, or should it be rebuilt or done new? So after that, we move into kind of our post-engagement phase. So at this point, we can either move into that app in 30 if you want to, experiment more and start to kick the tires a little bit with what that kind of architecture would look like. But we can also move into the full modernization where we start to tack away at all the different applications that you have and start to look at how we would modernize each of them. From a deliverables perspective, it's really kind of focused on those two pieces there, the vision and the roadmap. So from a vision perspective, we do catalog kind of an executive summary of what the goals are, what the expectation is. We have the catalog as is architecture, as well as the cloud adoption framework gap analysis, which is a survey that's based that kind of helps define your cloud maturity and where you're looking to go. And then the Azure consumption estimates for moving to the cloud. That's that monthly spend in Azure that I was talking about before. On the roadmap side, we are going to be giving out a 2B architecture, so a full diagram of the future state architecture in Azure, as well as any Microsoft recommended licensing, cost to do the migration or modernization effort, and then any additional services that might be needed. So as through the course of our discussion, if we decide we want to do performance testing as well, or additional security reviews, all those things could be, something that we would propose as additional services as part of that roadmap to make sure you can, show that journey to your supervisors and kind of get approval on where you want to go. So this here is an example of the Azure cost estimates. So there's a couple of different ways they look at it. That first one is the pay-as-you-go. Pay-as-you-go is the most expensive one. That's basic retail pricing for everything within Azure. We also have the pay-as-you-go with this A-Hub, which is an Azure hybrid benefit. The Azure hybrid benefit allows you to take your licensing that you currently have on-prem and reuse those in the cloud and offer some significant cost savings as part of that. And then we also have a 1 year and a 3 year reserved instance, which essentially allows you to reserve an instance if you know for sure you're going to need that server at that level of capability for a full year. You can get even further reduced pricing. And then the 3 year is even further reduced from that. At the end of the day, though, we do work very closely with all the Microsoft reps to make sure we have the latest pricing available for the customer. So as throughout the engagement, we're working very closely with Microsoft to make sure we're providing you with the most accurate information possible. This next screen is our cloud pilot tool. This is the tool that I mentioned that is used as a static code analysis tool for all the applications that we're looking to that we're scanning as part of the App Innovate. The thing I want to call your attention to is the middle section here with these red and green bars. This is essentially readiness scores on how ready the application is based on the scan to move to Azure. So something with 70%, it means it's 30% of the code, or a decent portion of the code needs to be modified or updated in order for you to actually move it into a platform as a service. So there's 3 different areas where it's scored on. The app service is that platform as a service that I mentioned. That's usually the most difficult in order to achieve. There's also container readiness, which is using something like Docker and an Azure Kubernetes service. And then finally, virtual machine readiness, which would be your lift and shift. So typically this is going to be the most advanced in terms of readiness because you're ultimately just picking up a server and putting it out into a different hosting provider out in the cloud. Wanted to talk a little bit about a couple different clients that we've worked on. So Connecticut DPH, we had a really awesome team on Connecticut DPH. I think Brianna was on that team, so good to see her on the call. But we did a lot of work with data to care surveillance program to really help stop the spread of HIV. And before we came in, they would get lab work in as paper documents from various hospitals and labs around Connecticut. And ultimately, if any of those labs ended up testing positive for HIV, then that information had to go through a long manual process of paper systems in order to get, put into a data to care queue for people who would actually go out in the field and help inform people that these lab results came back, and they may not be aware of them or be they may have no knowledge that lab work was was even they'll know the lab work was taken, but they wouldn't know the results of it were flagged for HIV because it goes straight to the Department of Public Health. So after we came in and we helped modernize that paper process, they went from a 20-day process to get the lab work in to an automated solution that was able to do it in less than a week. So huge cost savings and huge time savings, really, in order to get information out into the people that needed it so that they can ultimately respond to it. So that was a very kind of interesting case study that we wanted to share. We've also done 10 plus years supporting modernization efforts at the Massachusetts State's Legislature. There's a couple main areas that we focused in with them on their public site and agenda management. So as you can imagine, a lot of the legislative systems have been managing these agendas forever, but largely kind of paper-based process. So moving it into a systemized data format early on, and then taking that and expanding it and bringing it to something that's actually real-time, published on the public website and retrieved from an API backend, so that you have both the management as well as the public side view of something like the agendas of what's being talked about on the House floor. There's also a lot of work being done around the actual legislative document management. So the ability to track changes on documents, share those documents, and make amendments, view amendments to documents that multiple active amendments that might be on a document at one time. All that sort of technology, leveraging Microsoft Word, is something that our team was critical in helping not only kind of design and architect but build out for them. And then the last one I wanted to talk about was actually a recent App Innovate that we just completed for a company called Amerisure. They had a bit of a hybrid architecture. They had goals to move to the cloud, but they actually had some Oracle database that was on-prem that they really couldn't get off of, and they were stuck with. Something that we've seen with a couple of different partners. Ultimately, that Oracle database, the architecture was, we decided as part of the architecture to build it in a hybrid cloud environment where the Oracle database remained on-prem and all of their application services were moved into the cloud. As part of that, there was a VPN gateway set up and allowed them to have the full kind of VPN connectivity that they needed to still lock the application down and only be available internally. But we also had a lot of consideration around the architecture for what we call co-location of data, making sure that the actual applications that needed data could communicate to the Oracle database on-prem. And any sort of, if we had some areas, and we did in this application, we had some areas that were very chatty, and there were multiple calls, 30, 40 different calls to the database. So what we did was stood up an on-prem, very lightweight API that was on-prem and allowed that to have the chattiness and keep that co-located with the on-prem database. And then all the application servers would just have to call an API very simply, the single API call, and then allow that on-prem service to go ahead and communicate with the database in the way it was doing it, and then return the summary information at the end. So that's not always possible in every scenario, but it's something that through the course of the App Innovate and our discussion with the client, that we're ultimately able to come up with an approach that I think worked best for them and provided a mechanism to kind of actually get them started on their journey to the cloud, and then also start testing it and doing performance analysis to make sure it was doing what they wanted. So In terms of how to get started, I think the first thing you can do is obviously contact myself or anyone at the Tallan team to get a conversation started. We're happy to jump on a call. You can also contact your Microsoft rep to schedule a conversation about this App Innovate opportunity. They are all very familiar with the solution assessments and those opportunities, so they should be happy to give you any information that you need around the solution assessment and help work with one of us as a partner to help you in your organization through that. And with that, I think open it up to some Q&A or any additional topics if you guys want. So I see just on the